Yeah, as Diana mentioned, we're now away from Portland to New Hampshire. We stopped by and decided to share a little bit about the Lafayette Trail with the people of Biddeford here. I emphasize the connection of the town and the state of Maine with Lafayette, and also talk about the significance of the 1825 visit of General Lafayette to the United States and why it's important to celebrate it today in 2019. So Maine, of course, has a lot of French heritage that ought to be tapped into to build something that could nurture Franco-American friendships going forward. So there's a lot of ground to work on. You might know that in terms of Lafayette in Maine, you have a beautiful national park today called Acadian National Park. For 10 years, from 1919 to 1929, it was actually called Lafayette National Park and was renamed Acadian National Park later on. But you have this connection that was actually lost over time, but it does exist. And in terms of the tour of Lafayette in 1825, many towns today in 2019, including Biddeford, retain a strong memory of the visit that I'm trying to tap into and invite many communities, not only here in Maine, but also all over the country, to be part of that national conversation that we're having ahead of the bicentennial in 2024. So thank you for coming again. Thank you to Biddeford Heritage and Cultural Center for hosting me this morning. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Lafayette Trail is about. That is memorializing Lafayette's footsteps in the U.S. in 1824, documenting, mapping, and marking where he went during his tour. It's also about raising awareness about Lafayette's pivotal contribution to the founding of this country, and also increase the mutual understanding between the peoples of France and of the United States. So in 2019, I traveled about 22,000 miles, going to over 320 cities and towns across 25 states. Using a lot of technology that makes it easier for me, more actually comfortable, convenient, and for Lafayette himself, sometimes we get on a car with air conditioning, and sometimes we get on a plane, which Lafayette could not do. Instead, he would sometimes get on a boat, and sometimes that boat would sink in the bottom of a river, just like the Ohio River, with him on board. It happened once, actually, during the tour. So the mission is really to go to all of these historical societies, archives, and archival repositories to find the documentation, primary source documentation to corroborate where Lafayette went and provide a strong narrative, about the visit of Lafayette to each of these communities. So I work with state legislatures quite often. The mission is to identify the stops where Lafayette went, so I provide my research, and then I contact a state representative or senator to try to get his or her sponsorship in order to recognize what Lafayette did in their state. So, for instance, here on the screen is a talk that I've done in Massachusetts, a bill that I've worked on in Massachusetts. So it recognizes the footsteps of Lafayette, the roads he took in Massachusetts, in the western part of the state actually, when he came back in June 1825. So we have signs that have been installed in the western part of the state of Massachusetts, known as the Berkshires, to memorialize the steps that Lafayette took in that time. We did the same in New Hampshire. So Governor Sununu in May of 2019 signed a bill recognizing the Lafayette Trail, same thing, identifying the roads that Lafayette used, and authorizing the DOT to work with me, identify the best spots, and erect markers ahead of the bicentennial in 2024. We're also working in North Carolina with the legislature. There's currently a bill that has been filed that would appropriate $84,000 for historical markers, including Lafayette Trail markers. So that's also, and we're doing the same thing in Maine with the help of Senator Deschambault. We're going to try to get some legislature and support from the state to properly memorialize what Lafayette did here in Maine. So that's the legal aspect of it. There's also a website that I'm working on. So this is just to show you what the website looks like. I did it again recently. So take a look at it if you want. This is just an interactive slide to show you what it looks like. So who supports us, some quotes from people that are supporting the trail, and also the links to the media feeds of the Lafayette Trail, and also ways to contact the trail if you have any questions or suggestions. So that's the website, it's the LafayetteTrail.com. Another component that we're working on is a mapping program online. Same thing, if you go to the URL, the LafayetteTrail.com, You'll find this mapping program here. I'm going to show you a live demo momentarily, but the way it works here, as you can see on the screen, you have a blue line and a green line, if you can see both. Essentially, green is 1824, and blue is 1825. And all those numbers you see essentially represent the number of stops that Lafayette did. There's a total of 24 currently, that I'm mapping, that I have mapped out. So I'm not talking about towns here, like for instance in Boston there will be 25, 30 events, okay? So add it all up, you get to 820, 30 across 320 American towns that I could map. This is my blog also where I share information about the trail and the latest developments of the project. I'm going to give a short background about Lafayette in France and why he matters. So during the French Revolution, Lafayette was known for three things. The first one was to be the commander of the National Guard at a time of great peril for political life in France. It was a political turmoil, and it was hard to keep everybody safe at the time in France. So that was the mission of Lafayette when he was commander of the National Guard. Here is a depiction of Lafayette inside Notre Dame, where he was essentially participating in a ceremony. So the first thing is the National Guard. Second thing is the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, which Lafayette partially drafted alongside Thomas Jefferson. So same thing, 1789. And the third is the French flag. So the idea of Lafayette was that in France, when the nation was threatened to essentially collapse, Lafayette had this idea to symbolically bring the nation again together by tying three colors together, blue, white, and red. So the white symbolizing the color of the king, and blue and red being the symbol of the city of Paris and in extent of the people of France. So all together shaping the national flag. Okay, and this is a photo actually that I took at the Pictou Cemetery in Paris. This is the grave of Lafayette, and as you can see, there are many French flags around. There's only one flying over his grave, and it's an American flag. So it's still the same today, 2019. You will see that every 4th of July or around that day, usually now it's late June, you'll have the US ambassador to France come to the grave and say a few words about Lafayette and the significance of his actions for the bilateral friendship between our two countries. And then progressively, during the French Revolution, Lafayette was marginalized to the point that he was not able anymore to frame what would be the future legal framework of the new republic, which he did for 1789, 1780. But then in 1792, he started to be threatened by mandates of arrest. And essentially, this is the mandate of arrest from the government of France. The one in Lafayette, it was in August 1792. And Lafayette had to flee as a result. He relinquished his position as a commander of the Northern Army in Metz and went away and was captured. Spent 5 years in jail and was freed in 1787 by Napoleon himself and progressively resumed an active role in political life, French political life, although remained a little quiet the next couple of years afterward. And we switch, we go over the Atlantic Ocean, and this is how in 2019 a young American girl in New Hampshire sees Lafayette. So she designed this artwork probably 3 months ago, and just want to bring to your attention the design of the artwork. She basically dedicated half of the available room to emphasizing the youth of Lafayette, the fact that he was 19 years old when he came to the US in 1777, and basically the rest of the poster is about his adventure, his friendship with George Washington, and his tour of 1824. So I just thought it was interesting to show how today kids in the US think of Lafayette. I always go to classrooms to talk about the Lafayette Trail. I use the mapping program that I briefly introduced to you, and kids are always interested in knowing more, and especially they love the mapping program. So at the end, there's always a question or two. Recently in New Hampshire, there was a question from 2 girls, I remember. How could I forget, actually? It's the two questions are, why is there a state named after Lafayette in America? And I say, well, usually because it's named after a Native American tribe or a river, or comes from a British in Maine origin. So that was my question, and then my response. And the second question I got was, but then maybe we could split Texas in two and name one of the two houses Lafayette State. So I'm not saying it's constitutional, but it for sure get them engaged, interested in history. So just to give you a few examples. So then we go forward a little bit in the time frame. So we get to winter 1777-78. the Valley Forge, representation of Valley Forge, wintering of the army wintered there. So that's one of the very first representations of George Washington and Lafayette together in the United States. So that was after Lafayette was commissioned as a Major General in the Continental Army on July 31st, 1777. And fast forward, we get to 1824, where Lafayette comes to America, and America is amid a huge political crisis. There's a very contentious election, a lot of polarization of the political life, and we have John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson, William Crawford, and Henry Clay that are battling to get elected president. So everybody expects Andrew Jackson to win. He does not win, and John Quincy Adams actually claims the election, and it really aggravated the situation. And Lafayette was this unique figure in capacity to hold the nation together and prevent further damage to the unity of the young country. And that's really the impact he had during that tour has yet to wane in 2019. So that's really what I'm trying to tap into, to build a sustainable project that has a lasting impact toward 2024 and the bicentennial of the tour coming closer. I'll have this slide also to show you. This is in France. It's about 2 hours away from Paris, on the east side of Paris. It's a stained glass window depicting the Franco-American Alliance. It was installed in 1824, that is 100 years after the tour of 1824. And it shows the Franco-American Alliance. On the right side of the stained glass window, you have the American Army under, the American flag in Gerald Pershing, and on the other side you have the French Army. And what holds them together in the middle is Lafayette, who occupies the entire, or almost the entire, foreground of that middle window. And on top of that middle window is an angel that's about to hand over an olive branch. And the message here is, when we work together, we have our shared values in the service of mankind and universal freedom. We get things done and we win. But when we do not work together, we don't win as much. So that's the message here. And that Franco-American alliance was really important, to the point that in 2018, President of the United States invited President Macron to come to the US for what would be the first official state visit of a foreign dignitary. And so I got to go with President Macron and emphasize the message of Lafayette to the United States. We went to the Capitol, to the White House, and talked to federal officials and tried to emphasize more the impact that Lafayette has in the cities in America as well as in the countryside. So that message was received, and essentially I'm building upon those events like the state visit to raise awareness across the nation. So I do that state by state. So I have 25 states. It's a lot of miles, a lot of phone calls, but it's fascinating. So in 1824, when Lafayette is here, he's seen like a founding father that's coming back from the dead. It really is. I mean, for so many Americans, it was like he was dead. I mean, they have, after so long an absence, can you imagine? There's no Facebook, there's nothing of the sort back then. So how could you know whether Lafayette was still alive and in capacity to come back to America? Most Americans didn't know that. So when he comes back in 1824, he has this effect to bring back the Revolutionary War era to life. And that's why so many people flocked to city halls and taverns to meet him and touch him and shake his hand. So that's Henry Clay, how he talked about Lafayette. Essentially, you're like a patriot coming back from the dead, essentially, and contemplate the changes in the nation. That's exactly what Lafayette did. He came back and he witnessed the progress that was secured since the earliest times of this country. So when I travel across those 22,000 miles, I've seen some beauties. Sometimes that I was expecting, sometimes I have no idea they were right there. So this is one example. This is in a small town in Illinois by the name of Town, Illinois. It's by the Ohio River, and it was installed in a courthouse. So I was asking questions to find more information about the local history, and this lady sent me to the courthouse. And when I asked that question at the courthouse, somebody tells me, we have a painting of Lafayette in the courthouse. I say, okay, fine. Can you show it to me? Please, sure. So that's the painting they were referring to. So that was done during the WPA administration of Roosevelt, when federal government programs were creating jobs for Americans. And what I want to say here is that in that moment of national effort to bring more jobs to the country, Lafayette was depicted many, many times in artworks like here. So this is him here, facing a community, and you see here the courthouse that sort of represents the American rule of law that offers the capacity for a community to grow and make a living and conquer nature. So I'm talking about this because in Maine, that's exactly the narrative that's displayed when Lafayette is here, because Maine got its statehood in 1820, so it's a very recent state when Lafayette comes here. And many times you will see selectmen and representatives emphasize that conquer of mankind on nature that's granted by the American government and the universal freedom that the country is based upon. This is another painting in Kentucky. So that was done later on, but same thing. I want to show how communities get together and commission artwork to celebrate the Lafayette. And here's a third one in Washington, PA. The reception of Lafayette in downtown also was kind of important also. Washington, PA was home to the Whiskey Rebellion a few years ago, before Lafayette came, so 50 years prior to that, at the beginning of the Revolutionary War, but at the beginning of the nation's history. And 2019, Mount Vernon also celebrates every year. There's a birth night gala for the birthday of George Washington. So this year was about friends and the Franco-American friendship. So on the invitation card is displayed the key to the Bastille that Lafayette sent George Washington after the storming of the Bastille. And I'm coming to talk about essentially Maine. So I'm going to start giving you details about what Lafayette did exactly in the state of Maine. So he came twice in 1824 and 1825. He came for a few hours in 1824, September 1st, 1824, and went to the Portsmouth Navy Yard. So for many, including myself actually, I don't consider it like a visit to Maine because there was no reception at all. The governor did not travel. He didn't send anybody to welcome Lafayette the way usually states do it. So he actually technically went to Maine because the Portsmouth Navy Yard is in theory Maine. But the big moment when Lafayette was in Maine is in 1825, when he comes back after the Bunker Hill celebration near Boston, so in Charlestown, Mass. Lafayette was invited to lay the cornerstone of the Bunker Hill Monument, and after that he set out on his New England tour, which included a visit to Maine all the way to Portland. So I'm going to show you real quick the mapping program, the way it works, and you can go play with it yourself online. So you can pan around essentially, and I'm going to go to Maine and show you what happens when you zoom in and out. So if I go to Berwick, which is where Lafayette entered the state, you see the blue line here displaying the route Lafayette took, and you get individual dots here. I'm going to go here, it says 2. If I click on the 2 here, it's going to zoom. The cluster will break down into 2 individual dots, and if I click on one of them, it will show me exactly what Lafayette did. For instance, the first stop Lafayette ever made when he came in 1825 in June, on the 24th of June, was at the first Tavern, when he was officially received by Mr. Green on behalf of the selectmen of Berwick. And I have a photo of the tavern, which I took myself when I went there, as well as a description of what Lafayette did. And you can, if you want, click on that button here to increase the size of the image and download it. I want it to be interactive. I want people to play with it and get familiar and explore what Lafayette did. You can also, there's a tool that's kind of handy, which I like very much. It's about querying the database. So you can select a state. Let's say I'm interested in a state containing the letter MAI. So there's only Maine, essentially. So it returns to me Maine and shows me where Maine is. And as you can see, it gets highlighted in red here as I hover over the name of the state. And it tells you how many stops Lafayette made in the state of Maine. That is 9 total, plus the population of the state in 1824, about 350,000 people. Okay, so feel free to play with the program, again, the LafayetteTrail.com, and you'll have indications as to how to find it. And let's go back to the bridge. So that was, Berwick was at the time the main way to enter the state of Maine. So the governor of Maine, whose name was Governor Harris, sent 2 aides, Colonels Emerson and Dunlap, to welcome Lafayette on behalf of the state, which was not done a year prior in 1824. So after the state officially welcomed the nation's guests, that's how Lafayette is referred to, the nation's guests, he was taken to the Frost's Tavern that I was telling you about and addressed now by a representative, Mr. Green, from the town of Berwick. And then there was a reception. Then he went to see another person in Berwick, Mrs. Cushing, which he knew from the Revolutionary War. It's now a Berwick Central School. The building was torn down in 1924, and this school was built on the site. So this is a list of all the stops Lafayette made, the cities. So we have Berwick, we have Wells, we have Kennebunk, we have Biddeford, we have Saco, Scarborough, and Portland. And I'm going to show you one at a time what Lafayette did. So those are, I'm going to real quick on this. This is the first tavern here in South Berwick. They told me recently they found a historical painting in it. It's a wallpaper. Apparently they claim it was done by Mr. Dufour, a French guy, in the 1820s. And it's all over the historical building today. And this is on the right of Mrs. Cushing's mansion. So sometimes I'm going to show you historical newspapers clippings to show you where the sources come from. And it's important to me to get primary source documentation because going forward when you want to place markers, it's important to tell local lore from actual historical events. So newspapers are actually very, very important to document what Lafayette did. So he came on the 24th at 8 a.m. essentially, was received at the state line, and then proceeded north. So the next town on the way is Wells, and in Wells here is a letter I found in the Portsmouth Athenaeum. It shows you how people corresponded and wanted to know where Lafayette was so they could prepare receptions for him. Here, for instance, it shows you somebody in Maine, the Lindsay's Tavern, gets a letter, this letter, and it says Lafayette is going to have breakfast in South Berwick and dine in Kennebunk. We don't really know when he's going to come to our town, but it's on the way. And on the way, it was indeed, there was a reception at the tavern, but quickly Lafayette resumed his journey and went to Kennebunk. Kennebunk is a special town also for Lafayette, still today. I'll explain to you why. So first of all, he was received at that inn. There was a banquet. Lafayette hosted to Mr. Storer, who was the gentleman receiving Lafayette in Kennebunk, hosted to American Liberty, which is totally appropriate, and Lafayette responded and hosted to the ladies of Kennebunk. And so it was also a very popular toast, if I remember well. He got like 9 cheers or something. I think it's pretty good. I think it's number 1 or number 2 of the entire toast session. So it was addressed by Mr. Emerson on behalf of the citizens of Kennebunk. And then it was taken to another sort of store mansion to have a moment with the family there. I want to show here on the left, this is an invitation. Actually, it's more of the toasts that were given by Mr. Storer, and then the response to Lafayette. There's not the entire document, but I wanted to show you what it looks like. The Storer mention is on the middle, and on the right there is a clipping from Levasseur's book in French, so the personal secretary of Lafayette. And I want to point out to you in the middle the town seal of Kennebunk, which still in 2019 still uses something called the Lafayette elm, which was a tree that was planted some 200 years ago and essentially was renamed the Lafayette elm after the visit of Lafayette. The tree actually died of Dutch elm disease in the 1960s, so not so long ago. So people could have seen it until very recently, but still in 2019, the town of Kennebunk uses the Lafayette elm as the image, the seal of the town. So I think it tells you also how deeply enshrined the visit is in the town today. There's also other economic actors in Kennebunk using Lafayette's image. There's also a bank, but they didn't give me really any funding, so why would I give them advertisement? So I forget to mention to you the tree here. That's what it looked like before it fell down. Okay. All right, we get closer to here. Actually, we're going to get to Biddeford, where they get immediately to Saco, and then we come back to Biddeford after the visit to Portland. That's exactly what Lafayette did. So, even though today there's a difference like between the districts of Saco and Biddeford, in 1825, when Lafayette was received, Kennebunk and Saco and Biddeford decided to team up, and welcome Lafayette together to their two towns. So it was received actually at the western end of Biddeford, and then proceeded directly to what's now Pepperell Square, Cleves Hotel in Saco. Then after a reception there, he came back to a house called the Tavern of Mr. Spring, which is on Spring Island, 14 Elm Street. We have a photo of the tavern here on the left. Some clippings here to show you what Lafayette did also. And after that, it was taken to the house of Miss Thornton. So, and by the way, Mr. Spring, he knew from Bunker Hill also. There was a connection with, he bought a bottle of Bunker Hill. So very often it's a pattern that you see all the time, Lafayette getting together with veterans of the Revolutionary War to recall together the struggles leading to freedom eventually. And stayed overnight at the house of Mr. Spring. And the next day, Lafayette proceeded to Portland through Scarborough. There was a reception in Scarborough, so on what's now Route 1. Continued all the way to Portland, and in Portland he was received on the 25th, so by Stephen Longfellow in the morning. What's now the west end of Portland, it used to be called Bramhall's Hill. So that's the entrance where Lafayette was addressed by Stephen Longfellow. Longfellow that had just finished his term as a U.S. representative for Maine. And after that, Lafayette was taken through a procession of 5-6 streets, which included King Street, Free Street, Middle Street, Congress now, and all the way to the State House, where he was addressed by Governor Harris of Maine, plus the president of Bowdoin College, Mr. Allen, who came down from Brunswick to give him a diploma, an honorary degree of law, doctoral law. So that was given to him. It's very classic in America also to do that to Lafayette. He got one from William and Mary. He got one from many universities actually that wanted to establish a personal connection with nation's guests. So then he was taken to the house of Daniel Cobb, which was one of the most elegant mansions in Portland at the time. And then he was addressed by the president of the Masonic Lodge of Maine, gave me an address. And then there was a ball in Portland, also at the Union Hall on Free Street, where Lafayette also participated and got with local citizens of Portland. Then there was two visits to two ladies. The one was the daughter of General Dearborn, who was a rep for the District of Maine in the 1790s, before Maine was even a state. And so he went to see, paying tribute to his father, went to see this woman in Portland. The house would be today the Portland Museum of Art, that area. And then he also went to see the daughter of James Knox, which he knew from the Revolutionary War as well. So he stayed over at the house of Daniel Cobb in Portland, and the next day, that's the 26th, came down and passed again by Biddeford. So that's when he went to church. You might have heard the story that Lafayette went to church here. So that's correct. So if you look at some documents, like here is a document from the Proceedings of the Massachusetts Historical Society in the 1920s. A descendant of the Quincy family talked about a letter he found. So they recorded the episode, and they talked about Lafayette stopping at their little church in Biddeford. So that church would be today the one that's at the corner of Crescent and Graham Street. Would be a congregational church. Would be near the main way, into town. And basically, at the time, this place was called the Second Religious Society of Biddeford. So there was a pastor who came in 1797. The Second Religious Society was established in 1797, and there was a pastor, Mr. Tracy, whose name you find in all the documents, and he's the one who performed the service when Lafayette was here in the morning. So it was a Sunday, and the governor of Maine was really unhappy that Lafayette would travel on Sunday, so he decided not to go with him, and he got criticized for not going to church, and eventually, he gave up and he went to church here in Biddeford. So that's the story. And then he finished going back to Captain Springs Tavern in Saco, on Springs Island, and had breakfast there, and then proceeded back to New Hampshire, then ultimately to Vermont, and then back to New York City. So he could say, after visiting Maine and Vermont, I've been to all the states of the Union, which he did, because he went to all the states of the Union, 24 at the time, and 25 today, because in the meantime West Virginia became a state, so 25 for us today. So the trail in 2019 tried to tap into that framework and that heritage, and those the mark that Lafayette left in all those communities. So President Macron and friends endorsed the project. So this is a letter he wrote to the trail about a year ago. There's also many Americans writing letters to President Macron to tell them about the Lafayette Trail and how they want to get involved. And sometimes President Macron responds. So when he has free time, which is not quite often, he responds, or his chief of staff. Here's a response from his chief of staff to an American citizen in Georgia. The U.S. ambassador also endorsed the project about 2 weeks ago. She tweeted about a video that was done by the national media. So we got together by the White House in Washington, recorded that, and the U.S. ambassador, head of the G7 summit, tweeted that. So we get the ball rolling here as well, which is very exciting. And that we have a partnership that I secured with the American Friends of Lafayette and the William J. Pomeroy Foundation. So that partnership is going to ultimately lend markers, okay, to communities, fully funded markers. So that's why I need primary source documentation. And the process would be basically to get together with the local historical society of a town that would be selected to be given a marker. We would talk together about the text, about placing the marker, the GPS coordinates, getting the agreement from the owners of the land that we could place a marker on his property. So all of this ought to be considered before you actually place the marker. But the idea is that you place a marker and then you do an unveiling ceremony where you can invite folks to come, and you do an unveiling ceremony with a speech, and then people come here and celebrate together the local link to Lafayette, and really make them feel part of the national conversation that we're building. So that's really important, because if you want it to last, it has to be grounded in communities and not just parachuted from the top. And after the tour of 1825, Lafayette came back to France, of course, never returned to the U.S. ever again. And people really sometimes think that Lafayette is not a celebrity at all in France, or that he would be loved like a founding father here and hated like an enemy and a traitor to the nation in France. It's not that simple, because at the end of the 1920s, Lafayette was very popular in France. He actually did a tour of the country in France, similar to what he did in America, but at a smaller scale. And in Lyon, for instance, there was a bridge. So I was a student in Lyon for many years, so I used to take that bridge all the time. It's a big bridge. I mean, it's one of the major bridges of downtown Lyon. And today it's called the Bridge Lafayette and the Avenue Lafayette. And prior to his little tour in France in 1829, it was called Charles X Bridge and Charles X Avenue. Charles X is the last king that Lafayette helped overthrow. And when he went to Lyon, the Lyonnais were so fan of him, they decided to rename that bridge and that avenue after him. So he was that popular in Lyon that the folks decided there to change the name and get his name on the bridge, as opposed to the king that would, well, be king for not much longer. So today with the trail, if you can get a little souvenir, you can get one of those pins that you might have seen when you entered. So please know that this is a non-profit, so I'm constantly raising money. So if you feel like you want to drop a little donation on the way out when you get a pin, they are free, but I'm not going to say no if you want to drop a bill. So I want to finish by this. This is in New Hampshire. That photo was sent to me yesterday. And this is a side effect of my work. That's not one I want, but sometimes it happens. You cannot control people's behavior. So you can see the marker here on the text. It says Lafayette stopped at the Tavern, basically. And on the right side, I want you to take a look at the skid marks here. So somebody was that fascinated by Lafayette he pushed the brakes, crazy, to take a look at the marker. And now if you go there today, it's on Route 12A. The marks might have disappeared, but I can assure you this is an authentic photo. People do that to see Lafayette and his message today. So again, follow us on social media if you want. We have a Facebook page. I have my personal Twitter account where I inform people, followers, of what I do, where I am in one of the 25 states. And if you have any questions also, shoot me an email, a personal email or a professional email, and I'll be happy to answer now any questions that you might have on the talk, the trail, or just Lafayette himself. And once again, thanks for turning out on Labor Day weekend.
Questions, anyone?
Yep.
Did,
Oh, she's going to give you the mic.
oh, I see. Thank you for that great talk and the resources. I have a couple of questions. Did Lafayette keep and/or publish a travel journal?
Yeah, actually he has memoirs, but the travel journal was kept by his personal secretary. So they had a mission when they came to the U.S. It was also there was a 50th anniversary of the Revolutionary War, but they had a political agenda to revitalize the liberal school of thought in France. When I say liberal, I mean democracy, basically, the republic, when there was a growing authoritarian regime. So basically, the idea would be to bring back the lessons of the American experiment to France. So that's why he had this personal secretary, who later on would be a diplomat. I mean, he was a lettered person. He was a very educated person, and tagged along on the journey and went with Lafayette everywhere and recorded as much as he could what Lafayette did. So it's very uneven. Like sometimes it would be very, very thorough. Sometimes it would be very superficial. So it just depends. But I mean, he did the work as much as he could. So yes, Lafayette didn't do it himself, but the personal secretary followed him virtually everywhere. Okay.
Personal secretary. And along with that, just real quick, I wondered if you'd written about meeting with Peleg Wadsworth, Stephen Longfellow's father-in-law, who served with Washington, and if he mentioned speaking French with Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who would have been the professor of modern languages at Bowdoin.
Speaking French? Where was that?
Because Stephen Longfellow's son, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, was the professor at Bowdoin of modern languages, and it would have been a feather in his cap, in Longfellow's cap, to have spoken French with Lafayette.
I don't know that, if he spoke French. I mean, if you have details about that, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm just curious on that.
Yeah, thank you. Sure. Thank you for your questions. All right.
You want me to?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
I was going to ask you
You want to ask?
I was going to ask you where you were at with your legislation.
That's exactly.
You want to come over here, maybe?
I'm not used to a microphone.
Okay.
Telling
Put it right in front of him.
Well, I worked in a prison, so I can yell really. I wanted to.
Yeah, come over here. That's fine.
Those of you who don't know, my name is Susan Shambo. I live here in Biddeford, and I'm the state senator that represents this. Julian and I met about a month ago at the run of the mill on a very nice day outside with a gentleman from New Hampshire who went to St. Francis College with me, who was a U.S. Marshal and a House of Representatives member, who is very French and really called me and said, New Hampshire did this, and so Maine's got to do it, which is submit a bill so we can recognize General Lafayette. So that's why I met with Julien. Let me explain a little bit about the legislature. We ended the first half of our session in June. We don't go back till January. Bills have to be submitted to a legislative council. They have to accept for what we're going to be doing, what kind of bills will be in January. It's not as simple as last year when you could have had any bill you want, you just submit it, you didn't have to go before any board. And what they look at is they will admit bills to be discussed, basically if there's an economic value to it, and because it's a short session. The reason I say that is yesterday, we missed you. I want to recognize Representative Ryan Fecto also, who's here. We were at the Custom House yesterday in Portland and met the Consul General of France, who's assigned to Boston, and we had a discussion. The economic value, and I hate to talk about that, but that's the only way we can really push it, is, and I think, Julien, you said to that also. There are already tourist agencies in France who are planning historical trips to the United States in a couple of years. And one of them is to follow the Lafayette Trail. So the economic value is, and with his help, now all these states are not getting ready for that, but it will be a destination point for people from France. So that really opens the door to people from France to recognize and appreciate New England. I wanted to also say that MacArthur's Library has a lot of information, and I'll be working with them. It's not just me. I've approached Representative Fecto, Representative Foley, and Representative Dank. We are the 4 people that represent Biddeford. I'm also going to reach out to Saco, and all the towns that he visited, reach out to them so they can support the bill. We want this to pass. So there was something else I wanted to say. I just took little notes. I know we just got a brief history, but as Julien said, General Marquis de Lafayette came here and helped George Washington when he was 19 years old. I don't recall if you mentioned this, but the reason this is so significant in 1824, at the time he was the only living general from the Revolutionary War, and the significance is 50 years from when it began to 1824. So that's a great honor, and at that time he was 67, and he died 10 years later. So I think those kinds of things are kind of significant. So I just wanted to let you know that, and I'll be working again with Julien. I have the bills from Massachusetts and New Hampshire. What New Hampshire did is they gave it to the Department of Transportation once they passed it, because the whole issue was markers along the highway of where he was. So that's the kind of thing, is not only recognizing. I do know that the governor is very involved in this. She has honored Francophone people twice this year. Yesterday she was in Portland, and the French consulate and in Boston are very close with the governor. She says bienvenue now, so that's it. Bonjour and bienvenue. So I also want to mention, you saw the picture in Saco. If you don't recognize it, it's Deering Lumber.
It's the lumber
It's
company.
the yellow house at Deering Lumber, so it's still there. So
Yeah.
we'll take the sign Deering Lumber off and put it on again. So that's it. But
Yeah. Thank you, Senator Deschambault, and I look forward to working with you and
yeah.
make sure that Maine is ready for the bicentennial celebrations in 2024.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks for your help. I'm sure we'll get it done.
When you see it, if you want to come for the hearing and just support us and say that,
Yes.
especially historians, that would help. So, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Just a couple of things. One, the church that you showed, the second congregational church
Uh-huh.
in Biddeford, was not the original church.
Correct. Yeah.
The church that he worshipped in actually got knocked down maybe 6 years ago.
Okay.
And what happened was, the church that you showed was built in 1850.
Yeah.
And the original one, they actually moved it to a different location. So,
Yeah. Maybe I
I
made.
think I have pictures if you need them.
Yeah, I do actually. That would be good.
Okay.
Yeah, I was talking about the site,
Yeah.
and then yeah, a different building was built upon the same site.
Nope.
No, I mean
Yeah.
the building was
Yeah.
moved, but I'm saying today there's a building on the same site, and that's the corner of Graham and Crescent. That's what I wanted to point out.
And the other thing too that's kind of interesting, there's an overlap because it's a francophone network that's operated out of Quebec City.
Yep.
And they are trying to establish a cultural, historical, tourist network throughout the United States.
Uh-huh.
This kind of overlaps a little bit,
Yeah.
even though it's more from France. But I'll send you the links to that.
Yeah, please. Thanks. Yes.
So I just want to thank you very much for coming. And my question is, how can we best help you with your endeavors? And I really hope that we can get a marker or two here in the city. How do we best go about doing that?
So currently, it will be about public presence, like making noise and going with Senator Deschambault when she goes to the state senate, and when we have a hearing, showing popular support to know that the bill, people in Maine are behind the bill because they want to claim this Franco-American heritage. So I think that's a big component of it, and then share, talks or events, publicity that the trail gets, online on social media or stuff like that. I think it's a great way also to spread the word. Social media is a great way to spread a message at once on the net, and the more people share, the better it is to share a message. So I would say these are good ways to help going forward. Yeah. Thanks. All right. Thank you once again.